So as promised, here finally is the final video in my series showing you how I use simple stitches to create my very long, very long garden themed scroll. And if you hang around till the end, I'll give you a sneak peek on what's coming next, because I know that that's been a question that's come up a few times. What's next? Full disclosure, I've already started on my next scroll, and then I started on another scroll, so I'll give you a peek at those two pieces at the end of this video if you stick around. And without any further rambling from me, let's go ahead and show you the next two stitches. Let me show you some of the ways that I've used fly stitch in my scroll here. I've used it in all kinds of ways. For the palm leaves in this palm tree here, I've used it for different sorts of vines. The birds, the flying birds, were made using fly stitch. Now this is a really versatile stitch. I've used it to create these floating leaves and all kinds of little plant-like materials, little trees and shrubs and all kinds of things. They're all over the place, and I'll show you how I make fly stitch. I think there's a few different ways, but I'm going to show you the way that I make it. Fly stitch looks a bit like a Y, with a U shape at the top and a little stem at the bottom. Now this fly stitch, like this, is very similar to chain stitch, just the positioning of those two top threads is slightly different. When you're doing a chain stitch, the needle goes back into the same spot, but with fly stitch, the needle goes back into a spot that's a little bit away. But other than that, the stitches are exactly the same. You create the loop and you secure them in exactly the same way. So do you see how they're just slightly different, just that little spread? Now let me show you how I've used fly stitch in a number of different ways, and how it can really change depending on how long and wide your shape becomes, and it really changes the look of the stitch. So I'm creating a little row of little plants. I'm varying the height of each of them. I'm varying the lengths of the legs, and some of them are not quite straight, some of them are overlapping the other ones. And these could be the base of a flower, the stem and the leaves of a flower. It could just be a little plant on its own. It could be all kinds of things. Now I'll show you how I made the birds, the flying birds, with exactly the same stitch, but instead of that really deep cap at the top, I have a shallow cap with a short stem, and it changes the shape of the stitch quite dramatically. So now instead of a plant, it becomes a bird. And color choice too also plays a role here. I'm creating a whole flock of birds moving in all different directions, and without giving it much thought or just planning. I'm just taking the stitch and then moving my needle over somewhere else and doing another stitch in a different direction. And this is a flock of birds that has just leapt up into the air. It's not a very purposeful flock of birds. It's all flying in the same direction. They're going all over the place. And next, I'd like to show you a variation on the fly stitch. So those first two examples showed you what individual fly stitches look like, but you can also create a different effect by stacking your fly stitches one on top of the other ones in a row. So what I'm doing now is making one straight stitch to start, and now I'm going to do a series of fly stitches one below the other to create a plant-like or tree-like shape. It can look like an evergreen tree. This could look like a leaf with the veins of a leaf, or those could be the branches of a tree, or they could just be some generic plant-like material. And as I've mentioned before, I don't stop my shape right at the horizon line, right at the edge of the ground. I take it right into the ground, and now I'm going to do another one of those shapes, similar shape, on the other side of the dragonfly here, just really looking for any space that has a large blank area with nothing going on in it. And I'm adding some visual interest to that area, and I just keep building and building and building. And really, nature's like that. It's full of stuff. It's definitely not a minimalist thing to look at. And now let's move on to feather stitch. Now, feather stitch is like a continuous fly stitch. It starts the same way that fly stitch starts, but the thing to keep in mind, you're always starting at the top of your shape. So you start out exactly the same way that you started out with fly stitch. But then instead of just taking a little straight stitch to secure your fly stitch, you immediately go into another fly stitch. So that fly stitch is attached to the first one, and then you immediately take another one and you keep going, and you can go in either direction depending on your preference. You can go back and forth, you can keep going in one direction, you can change whenever you like. And shrubs, I find that shrubs and vines are really effective if you randomly alternate directions. So instead of going one way and then the other way, one, 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 just have a really random sequence and just really randomly decide when you're going to move the legs of your stitch over into another direction. And you don't have to keep going down in a straight line. You can curve the shape if you like. You have all kinds of options here. The stitches don't all have to be the same size. Some can be smaller than others, and the more varied and random you are, the more organic or realistic your plants will look. And now I'm going to fill this area in and drape some sort of a vine shaped plant over this area here. And as I said, I'm just going randomly back and forth, and I've got a couple of stitches on the end here from the video on the pistol stitch that I showed. And gonna have to figure out what to do with those and how to get around them. I don't know if you noticed there, but I forgot to put my needle around the loop, so I went back in and I just secured that loop again. And here I've changed the direction of my cloth. I just hold it in whichever direction is easier to take the stitches. But I'm making sure that my vine is somehow attached to that stump or whatever it is, that it's just not floating in the air. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm taking some stitches that will attach the shapes that I'm making now to the ground. And I'll keep going in different directions. And now let's take a look at how my piece looks now. My flock of birds has gotten a little bit bigger. I've added some more plants here. Now the ones that I've added are brighter green than what I had put first. So the brighter, more saturated colors tend to come forward, while the darker or the muted colors recede in the composition there. And now that my scroll is finished, what am I going to do next? Well, I've already started another scroll. This one has a very different theme. It's much more intentional. And what do you think the theme might be? I'll be working on it for a while. It definitely will require a lot more explanation than the garden. But wait, that's not all. I also started this other scroll. This one has a decidedly underwater theme. And before I get too far along, I started to think that this might be a fun make-along project, and then all of you out there could work along on this one with me. I've set it up as a subscription on my Ko-fi account, and I'll put a link down in the description box, and if you'd like to join in, we can work along on this other piece together. And if this sounds like fun, I'd love to have you join in, and if that isn't for you right now, there'll still be lots of content on my YouTube channel for you to enjoy. So, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you again really soon.